Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Climate Change in Beef Production, the Role of Enteric Methane in a Changing World. This webinar is brought to you by Weisenix. I'm Dr. Carl Hoppe. I'll be your host today. I'm the Extension Livestock Specialist here at the Carrington Research Extension Center, a part of North Dakota State University. I'm an Extension Beef Cattle Specialist dealing with beef cattle, cow-calf, and feedlot operations. Anyway, today's topic is methane emissions on beef production. Of course, methane emissions and climate change are a huge topic, so I'm looking forward to this opportunity here. To talk about it, we are pleased to receive a great reference on the subject, Dr. Gastón Federico Alfaro, who is an assistant professor at the National University in Cordoba, Argentina. Our guest, Dr. Gastón Alfaro, is an assistant professor at the National University of Cordoba, Argentina. He teaches undergraduate and postgraduate classes related to beef production. In 2022, he served as a postdoctoral research associate at the Panhandle Research and Extension Center of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in Nebraska. He received his Master of Science degree and PhD degrees from Auburn University, Alabama. His background is associated with beef nutrigenomics, with a focus on the effects of ruminal protected nutrients on fetal programming and muscle biology. He also worked in beef nutrition and management on feedlot operations, along with extension tasks for improving efficiency and productivity among beef producers. First of all, I'd like to begin by thanking our guest today for being here. Dr. Alfaro, your presence is a very special and important, and I'm sure the wealth of knowledge you'll share today will be invaluable to everyone tuning in. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd also like to welcome everyone that is participating in this webinar today, and thank you for your presence, time, and trust. Feel free to join in and participate as much as you'd like. I know you'll have questions during the presentation, so I encourage you to write them down on the chat as they come to your mind. Those questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's get down to business. Dr. Alfaro.
Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. As Dr. Hope said, my name is Gastón Alfaro. I am an assistant professor at the National University of Cordoba, Argentina. And today I will talk a little bit, just a glimpse about what climate change and beef production is related to the role of enteric methane in a changing world. The climate was never stable. It has been changing since the creation of the world. In fact, there have been 5 mass extinctions that changed the climate in the world. The most famous one was around 65 million years at the end of the Cretaceous period with the end of the dinosaurs. However, we are entering into a new mass extinction, and this time is related to the human activity, and the terminology of that period is called Anthropocene. This term is currently being used by academic professionals in order to explain the changes caused by mankind. The main question about all this topic is related to why climate change is important. Why should we worry about a problem that looks to happen far away in time? The main objective to the current intentions to mitigate the climate change are oriented towards decreasing or at least increasing by 2 degrees Celsius, to above pre-industrial levels. As we see in this slide, we see that there was an increase in the temperature in a global scale of 2 degrees Celsius since 1950. As we see here also, the increase was not homogeneous. It is to say that in some part of the world, the temperature was greater, and in other regions of the world, the temperature is currently lower than before. So why is important climate change? Climate change exists. It's going to happen even in a greater scale, and there's no person on the earth that will not suffer somehow the effects of climate change. It affects us all. Again, we cannot deny that. However, the interpretation of data regarding the real causes of climate change has been misunderstood in the last years. Whether that was intentional or not is not a matter of this presentation. The real fact is that mass media, usually from some years ago to the current year, finds livestock production as the main enemy for climate change fight. This is an example in a prestigious, famous media as the New York Times that shows that meat business is a big contributor for climate change. This article was written in the context of the COVID impact in 2020. But again, I want to highlight that mass media usually find livestock production as an enemy relating to the climate change fight. In the same line, another illustration that shows how the continued livestock production will change the world, of course, according to mass media, for worse. This is a drawing and a picture of a newspaper that's showing that if we increase the livestock production, we're going to enter to a desertification process. Moreover, political actions followed by this type of ideas are currently oriented towards decreasing global emissions, which is good. For example, FAO objectives for 2050 are aimed at decreasing poverty, ending hunger, and diminishing the greenhouse gas emissions. I want to point out the objectives of 2050 because it's very important for my generation. I am 30 years old, and we know that the big decisions in the world are taken by people of around 50 to 60 to 70 years old. And for my generation, it is very important to have a great knowledge about climate change because people from my generation will take the big decision at that time. So we have a challenging scenario here. The world is having a population growth and we need to improve our sustainability in our systems. Nevertheless, the international government groups settle their objectives based on evidence shown in academic articles. I am a scientist, and everybody with a scientific relation has used the phrase that we need to improve our food production by 2050 in order to feed the growing population. But what do these statements really mean? Do we really feed people? Are we working for feeding people? Again, global objectives for both demographic explosion and food production and climate change are targeted for the year 2050. How can we solve this scenario? On the one hand, we have a growing population, and on the other hand, we have to improve the sustainability of our production systems. I decided to talk about both topics because they are tightly related. However, the main objective of this presentation is climate change and the role of the methane emissions, which involves to all of us as animal food producers. There is a tight relationship also between crop global production and animal production. One clear example of that is the production of main grains and monogastrics, livestock production, as we can see in this slide. In the left section of the slide, we can see the changes in relative global production of main grain, such as wheat, barley, corn, coarse grain as a sorghum, and root crops, such as potatoes. We see that there was a great increase in the production of the main grains, such as corn, rice, oats. That increase improved the production of mainly monogastrics, as we can see in the right section of the slide. There was a huge growth in chicken and pig productions, but when we look at the cattle, sheep, and goat production, it remained more or less stable across time. This is counting since 1960, as we can see in the x-axis of the graphs. So what is going on here? We see that ruminant production remained more or less stable across time. Another way to explain these results is showing this graph. The authors of this study reported the share of grazing animals in animal food products. And we see that the proportion of food products coming from grazing animals, it is to say ruminants, decreased since 1961 to 2003 in all the world but China. China has a tremendous had a tremendous increase in its livestock import and production. It is well known that Chinese economy had a significant growth during the last decades, and that growth has an impact on Chinese population in terms of food consumption, with a growing election of animal proteins. It will not be strange in the near future to see the increase in livestock production in order to reduce those imports. But again, with this figure, we can see that the monogastric production had an impact on the animal food consumption from the world population. How can we relate this to the impact of climate change on the livestock production in terms of ruminants? Climate change will increase the temperature, will increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and will increase the precipitation variation. When we see the impacts of the increase in temperature, we know that the water will be scarce, there will be a greater need for water, and actually that water will compete with the human consumption of water. We also will see a decrease in forage quality because there will be more production of C4 forages instead of C3, which has better quality. And I will just summarize this slide because it has very good information, but in order to be more consistent, I will also explain a little bit about the increase in CO2 will also impact the forage quality, again, decreasing the C3 forages, and also the precipitation variation will have an impact on forage production. Also, the combination with the precipitation variation and increase in temperature will bring diseases for the forages, which will impact animal production and in crops. In order to explain what causes the climate change, I want to mention briefly the role of the three main greenhouse gases, which are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. They differ in their origin, warming potential, and the lifetime in the atmosphere. The warming potential of each specific greenhouse gas is calculated by its relative effect on an arbitrary time, usually 100 years, which is also the approximate lifespan of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The warming potential index allows the comparison among greenhouse gases in terms of pollution, capacity to contribute to climate change. Since carbon dioxide is the most abundant greenhouse gas, the warming potential of the non-greenhouse gas emissions, such as nitrous oxide and methane, are compared using the carbon oxide equivalent method. So it allows the comparison among them. First, I want to start with carbon dioxide. It is mainly emitted by oceans and fossil fuel burning. The warming potential, of course, is 1 carbon dioxide equivalent, and the lifetime in the atmosphere is 100 years. And for me, this slide is a very good example of how we increased the emission of carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution, which took place since 1760 to the year 1840. In the y-axis, we can see the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions, and on the x-axis, we can see the year. This study counted since 1750, as I said, until 1950. This only takes into account the production of carbon dioxide coming from fossil fuels. As we see, it is an exponential growth. Okay, so the question is now, what happened after 1950? Did we learn something about the increase in the production of carbon dioxide? Well, the answer is no. So as we see in this slide, we continue to grow the emission of carbon dioxide. As we can see, since 1960 up to 2020, the anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide continue to rise. The total anthropogenic emission was 11 gigaton of carbon per year. So the question is, why does the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere continue to rise? What are we doing wrong? But for that, we need to understand the carbon cycle. As we see here, the carbon is emitted by or produced by fossil fuel burning. It is to say, from gas reserves, oil reserves, and coal reserves. Also, we see that the carbon can be uptaken by the soils and by the oceans. The estimation indicates that half of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide produced can be sequestered, whereas the remaining carbon dioxide accumulates in the atmosphere. It is to say that if we add all the emission and we subtract all the uptaken carbon, the result is that we are putting 4.8, almost 5 gigatons of carbon per year. It is to say approximately 50% of the emission, the annual emission of carbon dioxide, is accumulated in the atmosphere. That means there is a lot of carbon that we are not able to uptake from the biosphere. The other greenhouse gas, which is emitted by human, is nitrous oxide. It mainly comes from land cultivation, fertilizer use, naturally by the denitrification process in soil and sediments. The warming potential is big. It's approximately 300 carbon dioxide equivalent, which is very potent, and the lifetime in the atmosphere is between 110 and 120 years. 20 years, sorry. The nitrous oxide can be emitted by anthropogenic source and natural source, as I said before. From the anthropogenic source, we see that agriculture produces a huge amount of nitrous oxide, almost 4.1 approximately teragrams. This is very important. I want to mention this because in order to understand the magnitude of carbon dioxide emitted per year, 1,000 teragram is a gigaton, right? So we saw before that we were putting in the atmosphere 5 gigatons or 5,000 teragrams of carbon dioxide. Here we're talking about a balance of between 10 and 15 teragrams of nitrous oxide. Of course, as we saw before, nitrous oxide is more potent than carbon dioxide, but we can see by the numbers that carbon dioxide is the main contributor to climate change, okay? So in terms of anthropogenic source, agriculture, biomass burning, fossil fuel also contribute to nitrous oxide. And from the natural sources, we see that land and the oceans are big contributor of nitrous oxide. However, the atmosphere plays a sinking role of nitrous oxide as well. But the most important thing that I want to talk today is about methane. Methane is produced naturally by wetlands and related to agriculture activities. We can mention beef production and also rice production. So it's a very important methane producer. The warming potential is smaller than nitrous oxides, around 23 carbon dioxide equivalent. And the lifetime in the atmosphere is between 9 and 12 years. We also have, as I said, a natural and anthropogenic source. In the case of anthropogenic source, we can mention fossil fuel, agriculture, as we saw before, the beef and rice production, and the natural source, the wetlands. However, after 9 to 12 years, the methane is oxidized in the atmosphere and broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and is uptaken by forest and soils. These numbers, the total emission is approximately 600 teragrams again, and the absorption is around 570 teragrams. Again, it's a huge difference between the emission of nitrous oxide and methane compared with carbon dioxide. Agriculture professionals need to be honest about the fact that enteric methane produced by cattle generates real pollution in the atmosphere. We cannot deny that. But contrary to fossil fuel burning, livestock production, particularly ruminant production, requires the utilization of grassland and forest lands in order to sustain the production. Grassland areas are exceptional carbon dioxide uptake agents. And again, in order to produce beef, we need grass. Okay? This, as we are going to see in the next slide, this becomes a cycle. Okay? Because we produce meat, we emit methane, but the methane emitted by the beef production is uptaken by grass. But what happened with fossil fuels? Do we have any sequestration agent for uptaking the carbon dioxide produced by that fossil fuel burning? We don't have that. What happened? The carbon dioxide produced by industries, cars, put the name that you want, have to be uptaken by the same sequestration agent that enables the production of beef. Again, methane is a cycle. Okay, this is an example. One cow produces around 100 kilograms of methane per year, or 250 carbon dioxide equivalent. That methane remains in the atmosphere between 9 to 12 years, and then is oxidized and divided into carbon dioxide and water. The carbon dioxide is uptaken by forests and grasslands through photosynthesis, and then that carbon is stored in soil and grass. 1 hectare of grassland can store up to 4 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And we have to remember that 1 cow produces 250 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. Another thing to remark is that if we maintain the same number of animals in the same area, we're not, at the end of the day, we're not polluting or contaminating, because the same amount of carbon remains in the cycle, and we are not causing that climate change. Okay. And one clear example of the stability of methane production by livestock was shown by Christoph in 2012, who compared the methane emissions from actual farm animals in the United States versus the pre-European settlement in terms of wild ruminants. The enteric methane emissions from wild ruminants such as bisons, elks, and deers in the pre-European settlement period was about 86% of the total emission methane emissions that is currently being emitted in the States from farm animals. And it's also important to mention that in this study, the author was assuming a total bison population size of 50 million. Okay, the author also showed what happened if the bison population was greater or smaller. But the main point here is that before the European went to the States, there was more or less the same amount of methane emitted compared with now, with this year. Another example of this type of data is a historical comparison in Germany. This study showed that the methane emission in 1892 was greater compared with the year 2003. And also it's important to mention that, or to consider that Germany is a developed country, and in which the condition for growing cattle is different than other regions of the world. But again, the main difference between the two time points is that in 1882 there were more animals. That means that we are producing more animal food products with less animals. We are increasing that efficiency of production. And also we're decreasing the amount of methane produced per animal. Okay. These are also results from the same study. In the left section of the slide, we can see the enteric methane emission intensity in grams of methane per kilogram of product. The kilogram of product here can be beef and veal or sheep and goat meat. And as we can see in the 1883, the emission was greater for both species compared with 2020. Again, where the German people are producing less methane in their farms. And in the right section of the slide, we can see the enteric methane emission per person in terms of kilogram per year. And this is very interesting result because in 1883, authors reported a greater emission compared with 2020. Okay, this outcome is a result of two variables. First, the reduction in number of individual animal methane production. And second, there was an increase in total number in the country. Okay, in Germany, the actual population is 7 times greater than in 1883. So that means that they were feeding, when I say they, in Germany, are feeding people 7 times more people with less animals. Okay, so why is ruminant production that important in the world? What makes ruminant so special? And this will have an impact on where the ruminants are distributed in the world, and that also will have an impact in climate change scenario where the animals will be located. Okay, so first, mammals cannot degrade cellulose. The enzyme responsible for breaking up cellulose is found only in bacteria that they are hosted by ruminants. Ruminants can host millions of bacteria in the rumen, achieving a perfect symbiotic relationship. As I said, the diet of ruminants determine the places where they are located in the world. As I said, bacteria can degrade cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin that are found mainly in grass, and that grass is going to explain us where the ruminants are. But first, we're going to take a look into the monogastrics. Where are the 1 billion pigs? Well, as this slide shows, they are mainly located in China, Europe, and the States, especially close to Kansas, and also a little bit in the south of Brazil. Okay? As we know, monogastrics require, as we saw in the second slide, main grains, mainly like corn, specifically corn. That's why they are located in this region. Similarly, the 20 billion chicken are located mainly in China, Europe, in the States, in the Southeast, close to my beloved Alabama, and also in the South region of Brazil. But what happened with the ruminants, especially with cattle? If we see this, the distribution of the chicken is very different to the distribution of the cattle. What is going on here? Cattle can be produced and raised in places where other animals cannot be raised. Okay, think about also in terms of the society on those places. We are producing jobs in places where not other animals can be raised. We can feed people with or not other animals can be raised. Look at Africa, the sub-Saharan region. It is highly populated with beef. Okay, of course, India has a huge population of cattle due to religion reasons. Look at South America. We have many cattle here. The states are highly distributed. We look at Mexico also. There's a huge presence of cattle. In the same line, we can see the distribution of cattle in 2006, and this is very important. 80% of the beef cattle is located in the subtropical region and tropical region. How does this impact in climate change? This is an excellent job and an article presented by Koch and colleagues in 2020, explaining that if the current climate change scenario continue to take place, we will need to rethink about our beef production systems. One clear example of that is the substitution of our breeds. For example, in my country, in Argentina, we are seeing a moving of the cattle production towards the subtropical region because in the Pampas, where we have very good soil quality, we are mainly producing corn and soybeans. So that movement of cattle represent a change in the breeds that we use. We usually, in the Pampas, we used Angus. Now we have to use more Indicus blood, such as Braford, Brangus, or actually Brahman cattle. That will also have an impact in the markets where we are selling those products. So as we start thinking, climate change will not only have an impact on crop production, but also cattle production, and the markets will change. But that's why understanding the methane cycle is so important. In the case of beef production stages for the production of beef, during the lifetime of beef cattle, including cow system and backgrounding, cattle are raised in a system that captures carbon, thanks to the available grassland on the farm, resulting in a balanced methane cycle. Most of cow systems around the world are based on pasture. That pastures uptake carbon from the atmosphere. There are some exceptions in which cow system takes place in confinement, but they are the exceptions. In the case of backgrounding, at least in South America, we have the backgrounding mostly in pasture, and we know that in the United States, the backgrounding takes place in confinement. The finishing period mostly takes place in feedlot. Again, in South America, we still have the finishing period in pasture. So what this slide means is that in most of the beef cattle lifetime, they spend in pastures, in pasture systems. In cow system backgrounding, they can spend the time in a pasture which captures the carbon. Okay, so they spend only between 3 and 6 months in the finishing period in the feedlot, in which, of course, the uptake of carbon is not as high as the grassland. Many producers and even countries find their distinctive commercial aptitude by fattening animals on grazing systems, such as I said, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, and Paraguay. Many producers in this region have a positive carbon balance at the end of the year. In order to understand the difference in the type of production, it is to say feedlot versus grazing system, first I want to mention a little bit the methanogenesis process that will help us to understand the differences in the type of production. As we saw, ruminants can digest carbohydrates such as cellulose, which then is converted into pyruvate, which has 3 carbons in their chemical structure. And for us as a nutritionist, methane is a helper for us because we don't want the hydrogen to be in the rumen. Hydrogen is potentially difficult to handle in the rumen, and we need to sink it somehow. One of the chemical agents for sinking that hydrogen is methane. Okay, there are others, but I don't want to go into detail of those. So hydrogen again is very necessary. Sorry, methane is very necessary for maintaining ruminant health. Okay. So the amount of methane that we produce depends on the diet. We're going to see that now. If we provide more forage to the diet, there will be a greater acetate production. Acetate is a chemical compound that has 2 carbons. Acetate comes from pyruvate, so there will be a carbon dioxide released from that conversion, and we will find also 2 hydrogens. Okay, this is a more methanogenic diet compared with if we provide more grains to the diet, which increase the amount of propionate in the rumen. Propionate is a chemical compound with 3 carbons, so there is no release of carbon during the conversion from pyruvate to propionate. Okay, so if we need to select a diet that produces less methane, we will choose a diet with greater concentration of grains, okay, such as a feedlot diet. So again, we have 2 types of production systems, feedlot and grazing systems. The feedlot will produce less methane per unit of output. In this case, the output is the final body weight of the animal. But the problem with feedlot is that we cannot uptake much carbon from the atmosphere because, of course, we are not having the same amount of grass compared with the grazing system. In the case of grazing system, the problem is that we are producing more methane due to the greater production of acetate, as we saw before, per unit of body weight. But there is a greater capture of carbon thanks to the photosynthetic action of the grass. One of the strategies that we have for decreasing the methane production is by using feed additives. One feed additive that is currently being used by researchers and nutritional companies is the utilization of red algae. It has a very good methanogenic activity, and is of course very useful in the context of climate change, and represents the main strategy for reducing the methane emissions. The 2 species used is Asparagospis taxiformis and Armata. Both of them present a chemical compound called bromoform. I don't want to explain this publicly because it's going to be very boring for you, but just to mention that bromoform, the chemical compound present in the algae, acts in conjunction with vitamin B12 or cobalamin, and they inhibit an enzyme responsible for the formation of methane called methyl H4MP. And this is the main physiological action of this compound. One way or that researchers are trying to find a way to supplement bromophore directly to the diet in a ruminant protected way, but that is currently being investigated. That there is no product, as far as I know, available in the market for that purpose. One example of the utilization of algae was reported by Kinley and colleagues in 2020, in which 20 Brahman and Angus cross steers were used, and they were supplemented with the algae at a level of 0 in the control group, 0.5, 0.10, and 0.20% of the organic, the organic matter intake. And authors reported a lower production of methane with the augmented inclusion of the algae in the diet, and at the same time they saw an increase in the hydrogen emissions. Okay, as we saw before, methane is a sink for hydrogen. If we have less methane, we're going to have more hydrogen. One important thing here in this study was that the performance was not affected by the inclusion of the algae, as we see in terms of average daily gain. Interestingly, the greater the inclusion of the algae, the better average daily gain the steers had. Okay. Another similar study reported that the inclusion of the algae in different inclusion rate compared with the previous study, inclusion rate at 0.0, 0.25, and 0.50% of organic matter intake showed a decrease in methane, similar to the last study, and an increase in hydrogen emissions. In this particular study, authors did not report an improvement in performance in terms of average daily gain or final body weight. The pros of using algae is that studies have reported a significant reduction of methane production, up to 98%. Again, we cannot totally eliminate methane from the rumen because it's necessary for sinking those hydrogens. As saw in the first study, there can be an increase in feed efficiency, even though the reason why the feed efficiency is better is not fully elucidated up to today. This potential increase in the performance of the animals can increase the profitability of the beef production systems. The cons of using algae is that it requires a very large amount for being productively efficient. Historically, cattle in the coastal regions of the world, especially in the tropical area of the world, were fed with algae, but moving large quantities of algae is a problem in terms of logistics, production. It's very difficult to do it. That's why it has to be cultivated artificially. It requires a lot of money. And also there is a lack of trust from consumers due to health issues related to the volatility of bromoform. It's very hard to handle bromoform if we want to feed them directly to the animals. Another additive could be essential oils, that can be found in seeds, flower, buds, roots of different types of plants, very common plants actually, like oregano, lime, eucalyptus, which is very present in the south of the world, garlic, many different vegetables. The mechanism of the inhibition of methane in this case is that lipids can partially be hydrogenated in the rumen. The essential oils are unsaturated, and do you remember that the hydrogen that are synced by methane, in the case of the essential oils, the hydrogen, instead of going to the methane, are going to for the saturation of the lipids. That's why we see a reduction in methane production by using essential oils. A very interesting study conducted by a colleague of mine here in Cordoba, in Argentina, showed that there was this study was conducted in vitro, and that is a partial study, which showed that the inclusion of 30 to 300 microliter per liter of ruminant fluid led to a reduction in methane production. The ruminant fluid was obtained from different types of animals, such as backgrounding animal, fattening animal, even dairy. Okay. And also, it's interesting to see that the organic matter digestibility was not that affected by the high inclusion of lipids in the diet, or essential oils. Sorry. Another way to mitigate the emission of methane in our cattle is by selecting animals by the residual feed intake. The residual feed intake is a concept in which takes into account the amount of feed consumed by the animal and the amount of body weight gain of the animal. Thanks to the utilization of feeders with scales, we can identify how much feed the animal consumes per day, and we can select animals with high residual feed intake and low residual feed intake. We are going to select, of course, the animals with low residual feed intake because they are going to produce the same amount of body weight with less feed. Different articles have shown that there is a relationship between residual feed intake and methane production. Interestingly, I selected 3 articles which show that selecting for low residual feed intake animals, also we are selecting for animals that produces less methane. Okay. The only difference in the studies, and that there is no a final answer on this, is that the amount of methane produced per kilogram of dry matter intake may be different. Some studies show that there is a greater methane per kilogram of dry matter intake, or less, and others there's no difference. So, but the take-home message here is that if we select animals for low residual feed intake, which is a trait that is very popular among breeds, we are also selecting animals for low methane production. Also, there is a growing area of research that seeks to understand the concept of residual methane. Residual methane is also heritable as feed intake, and residual methane usually present no significant relationship with dry matter intake and body weight. It is to say that we can select for an animal that produces less methane than others, but we are not affecting the performance of those animals. But if there is a take-home message that I want you to take from this presentation, is that we are doing all of this type of research. We are trying to understand methane production in beef cattle, and that's what I always say to students and whoever I have the possibility to talk about this topic, is that we are food producers. Okay, we need to increase the food production in order to feed people. That's why we cannot wait. Okay. That's the importance of the continuous production of beef cattle. We cannot stop the production of beef cattle, especially in third world countries, in which people the only food that has good quality is beef. Okay, I just selected two paragraphs that for me are very very important. That is that there are 5,400 million people in the world, about 14% of the population who are chronically or acutely malnourished. And the other text says that all young children have the potential to grow similarly, regardless their ethnic groups or place of birth, if they are in a healthy environment and receive adequate nutrition. Beef is a solution for both problems. We need to increase the beef production. We cannot stop producing beef. We cannot stop consuming beef because it's necessary for our health, for our economy, and for our environment. The future direction in this topic are: popular opinion needs to be critically addressed with objective scientific data. We need more objective data and we need less opinions. We need to be founded on objective data. That's why research is important. The increasing world population needs to be fed with a high quality animal protein. Multi-approach strategies for mitigating methane emission from beef cattle must be exercised, such as the use of feed additives, selecting animals for residual feed intake or residual methane. Producers in different regions of the world may adopt different mitigation strategies. So that's all for today, and that is my contact. I will be happy to address all the questions that you may have. I cannot hear you, doctor.
Sorry. My apologies to everyone. I had it on mute. Now let's take a look at a few questions from the audience.
Okay.
Thank you for that interesting presentation. We have one from Lucas Pinho. Excuse me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. That's an interesting topic, he says. Dr. Alfaro, how can technology and innovation reduce methane emissions, especially in the near future? And I think you've already answered part of that, but may I just say, which one do you think has most potential in the near future?
I think that all of them has or brings a potential solution depending on the region of the world. For example, if we are in the United States, we can easily adopt feed additives for reducing the methane emission, and also selecting animals for low residual feed intake, which leads to reduced methane emissions. And also, there is another very interesting topic that I didn't mention today because it's going to be long. The presentation is about the genetic modification of plants and forages, and also the microbiome in the rumen. There are research going on that says that if we increase the amount of lipids in the forage, that will help us to reduce the methane emissions. That's from one side. And from the other side, we can modify the microbiome in the rumen by reducing the archaea, that are the methanogenic microbes in the rumen, and that way we can decrease the methane. In other regions of the world, such as my country in Argentina, we're starting to use residual feed intake as a trait for selecting animals, and so that the use of that strategy is going to be slow, but we can easily adopt the feed additives strategies. So, as I said in the presentation, there are a multi-approach strategy to take.
We have another question for you from Sonia Batchop. She says, excellent presentation. Thanks, Dr. Alfaro. It was a very interesting webinar. My question is, and it's kind of precise, how much algae, and I assume they refer to red algae, should we feed to each cow, and I assume that's mature cow, in order to deprivate the methane production in the rumen? How much red algae do we need to provide to make an impact?
Yes, I would say that in terms of percentage of organic organic matter as a dry matter intake. As we saw in the study, they show that the utilization of algae at a level of 0.2% of the organic dry matter intake have a good impact on methane emission restriction. But in terms of amounts, in terms of grams or pounds per day, that will depend on the animal. But saying that if we include the algae at the level of 0.2 organic matter in the diet, that will be my final answer.
I have a different question to ask
Yes.
you. And it's from me, not from the audience. But so in the United States, we have some companies that have developed products that will decrease methane production in finishing cattle, and they're available to feed. Question I have is, since you've identified as methane production as a global issue, should this be a government subsidized payment to producers to get them to utilize this type of technology, or is this something that should be bared upon the producers that produce beef?
Yes.
Who pays for it?
Yeah, actually, there is like most of things in life. There are two ways of addressing this issue: the good way and the bad way. Okay, the good way is through carbon credits. Actually, many countries use the carbon credit system, such as Canada, in which if you have a positive carbon balance in your budget, in measuring a year basis, you can sell that carbon to other producers who, of course, are lacking carbon of the balance or a negative carbon balance. And the bad way is by taxing the carbon, which is a strategy that New Zealand applies. Both ways of doing the carbon control aims at having less carbon in their production systems. I think it's a governmental use issue that they are thinking at least in the first world country, they are using it, and I think that in the rest of the world they're going to follow the same steps. I don't know if that answers your question, Doctor.
It takes on a different perspective. I appreciate your response.
Yeah.
I did have one other question that was just a little bit on your presentation that I wasn't quite sure about. I think you were talking about Germany in 1892, how their methane production was higher than it currently is.
Yes.
You kind of lost me on that. Can you explain that again? Why was it higher then than now?
Yeah. Actually, that was an estimation. It was not, of course, an actual measurement of the methane emissions. But the main or the take-home message of the paper was that we are in Germany. They are producing less methane because the greater efficiency in production of the animals. Okay. Each animal produces more body weight, if you wish, or eggs or milk, whatever the end product you want to put, but they're being more efficient and they're having more product per animal. And also, they were feeding more people with less animals. That's why the emission per person was lower.
Okay, emission. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, let me finish up here a little bit now. Again, thank you very much, Dr. Alfaro, for the excellent presentation. You've done a great job of gathering very relevant and timely information about methane emissions on beef production and alternatives to mitigate it. We are grateful for your contribution. Also, on behalf of the Wisentex team, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and participating in today's webinar. Many thanks to the people who are backstage as well, who always contribute to the dissemination of quality content for the Beef Podcast Show. To wrap it up, I invite you to follow the Beef Podcast Show on whichever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. The link for the Beef Podcast Show's website is available here on the chat. It's https www.beefpodcastshow.com. Dr. Gaston Federico Alfaro, do you have any final messages for our participants?
Just one, and please eat more barbecue, that we need it. all the world needs. And thank you so much for listening to me. Sorry for my English. It's been a long time without speaking in English that long. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
I understood you quite well. Thank you very much. Until next time, everyone, have a good day. Good night.